I think we've still got Mukaddim. Mukaddim, if you can lift your microphone, or I'll do it for you, whichever way we go.
Yep. Hi.
Brilliant. Yep. Excellent. And I'll put myself back to a video picture so you can see my ugly mug. Brilliant sessions, guys. And I think they both of them truly highlight the evolution of CDNs, really in my mind as the first, as you pointed out, Mukaddim, as the first edge compute networks. They're a very fertile ground for this edge compute, the continuing evolution of edge compute anyway, and so on. So I've got a few questions here, and actually, if anyone else has got any questions for Steve or Mukaddim, either drop them in the chat room or follow the normal rules, lift your camera and click raise hand, and we'll try and bring you into the chat. But I wanted to start off with a question of my own. If, in terms of underpinning edge computing, it's a very broad question, this, so feel free to answer it as you see fit. But how much abstraction can we provide to application developers for deploying edge compute applications into networks? Where are we at with that degree of abstraction?
I think we're quite advanced in some ways. So I'll just pointing at the piece I finished talking about, the edge functions product that we're bringing out, that is pretty far abstracted. The customers, you know, if you want to use it, you write some code in Node.js and you include your libraries, or you write some code in Go and include your libraries, you upload it and go. We sort out everything else. So there's the abstraction is absolute. There's no concern for server. There's no concern for where it's going to run. There's no concern for, you know, making sure there's enough servers there. We handle the load balancing of that for you. And then all of the response out of that, of course, is run by your logic, but the process of getting your workload to run in an edge is as simple as I've written my function, I've got my libraries, and I've published, and I'm using versioning, and I've pushed it to have a, you know, like a public alias as such. So I think quite a long way down the path. If you look at that, other bare metal service providers, VMs, you know, those things are quite well abstracted as well. So, but they're more complex and require deeper engagement from the customer.
And Mukaddim, are you seeing the same?
Yes, yes. So I would basically complement what Steve has said. So basically, the way the developers are communicating and interacting with the cloud providers today and the CDNs today, so that model is not going to change, because you can't expect the developer to basically build a set of application to run on the cloud POPs and another set of applications to run at the edge. So basically, the CI/CD tools, the development environments, the technology stack that they're using to run their applications on the CDN caches or on the hyperscaler cloud POPs, it would be the same set of applications that will then extend to the edge. So that's why I use the word or the terminology cloud to the edge continuum. So right now, that continuum exists to a certain extent, but not to the extent that you can leverage that together with the mobility of the user. When 5G comes in, and then you have a separation of the user and control plane, and the orchestration of the workload together with that. So that bit is today missing. But right now, if I wanted to take on an application and use the same cloud native principles and want to run it on an edge node, it is possible, but not together with the mobility and the session anchoring and the mobility of the user.
And we're seeing, you know, AWS launch its deep edge strategies. I think they called it wavelength. We've seen Google and Azure start making moves in that direction as well. And obviously, when you get competitive landscapes emerging like that for a long time, you end up having to code once for one environment and another, at least modify your software for another environment and so on. But I mean, we're probably a long way from it, but do you think that there is a hope that we might find some degree of standardization in the availability of interfaces? For example, with COTS hardware, you know, hardware does have variances. We've got GPUs available in some places. We've got different ways of addressing and so on and so forth. You know, do you think we're looking at a sort of a couple of years before these competitors start creating some standard frameworks, or do you think that we're decades away?
No, so I have said this before in some other public forums, is that the sweet spot for edge computing is between 2023 to 2025. Mm-hmm. So before that, So already there are several edge computing consortiums, and there are several standardization that are going on. So there is a GSMA supported standardization effort that are happening, and then 3GPP is working on edge computing as well. So those standardization will happen, and what we will probably start seeing in between 2021 and 2022, the hyperscalers are going to standardize on how they are creating that common abstraction layer for the developers to basically explore and exploit the edge capabilities. So I'm pretty hopeful that we are not that far away from edge computing to come into reality in its full-fledged form.
This is why we called it a future briefing. Steve, any thoughts on that? What's your forward-looking thoughts?
Well, I think the key, as has been pointed out, is really the simple integration. So, if you want to use compute in 5 different locations, are they all the same provider? Can you do it all once, or do you have to do it 5 times? And that abstraction is really where the innovation and the future look is, I think. How do you, if you're using Terraform today to manage your distribution and your deployments, can you also bake in with a pretty simple set of executions, access to a set of edge locations that may have some slightly different underlying hardware, but you don't have to care about that. That's the bit that's the challenge that the service providers, such as Limelight, are looking at doing in order to understand that complexity and bring that to the market. And I think that level of integration is what the opportunity is, and also what the challenge for everyone is today. Can I adopt edge? Well, do I have to integrate with 5 different operators? I think is
so we're not quite at a write once, run everywhere. We're kind of at a write once, run everywhere within a certain set of parameters.
Well, I think it also requires subtle changes in software. We also hand wave, oh yes, you'll be able to integrate it with Terraform. Well, what if your application isn't built that way today? Do you spend, how much of your time do you then spend on rewriting it so it can work that way? So you have to get back to the business problem. What's the key element that's driving me that says I need to gain that additional performance benefit, either from introspection or from end-to-end visibility, or to improve the quality of my login process or my search, or whatever your business problem is that you have a performance challenge with, that will drive your move towards the edge. And I think for us as a content industry, we can't forget, we can't be totally technology-led anymore, right? This is about saying we need to solve a performance problem, so let's go solve it. And if the edge is the right answer and we can make it work for people, then it will get used. If it's just let's shoehorn this into this hole, then it won't get used.
Perfect. So we've got some questions coming in on the chat room here. Mohit asking, is edge necessarily seen as somewhere close to last mile, or can it be considered close or at first mile as well?
Yeah. So if I can take the question. Yeah. Yes. So edge comes in layers. So basically there are 3 layers of edge computing. So there is the network edge, which is within the operator's administrative boundary. And then there is the customer edge, which is either in the enterprise customers' branch locations or in campus locations. And there is the true edge, which is basically the device edge. So I'm talking about sensors, IoT devices, drones out in the field, doing remote biometrics, doing local processing, doing local gathering. So when Mohit asked this question that can it be in the first mile? Yes, it could be in the first mile. That's the example of the customer edge I'm talking about, where the customer is in control of how that edge has been built and what runs there. But it could be actually provided not by the customer himself or herself, rather it is provided by an operator or an hyperscaler provider who is willing to extend the edge to the customer premises and then give the control back to the customer.
Mm-hmm. Steve, any thoughts on
that? No, I think it's about where the connection is, right? Where the source and the end user are. If they're in, if you're doing like we used to do, an outside broadcast from a race course sometime in the future when that's possible again, are you at the edge when you're in the SAT truck? The answer is probably yes. You're connected to a network and you're out at the edge, and that device is an edge as much as anything. But I think it's at the intersection of that last mile into the ISP. That's your fog layer type approach if you think about it in metropolitan networks as well. So yeah, it can be at either end of the workflow, depending on how you think about workflows.
I think for what it's worth, I always like to think of it as where layer 4 can connect to layer 4 or layer 3 can connect to layer 3. I think it really depends on what you're doing. So just a couple of other questions. Terry's, which I hadn't noticed you were in the chat room, so hi Terry. He's commented, hyperscalers sitting at the MEC location in ISP networks will emerge as competition to CDNs. No?
Steve, you go. I have a different take.
Maybe, maybe not. I think it all depends how, if we all, let me start the sentence again. If you take another thing that's generally hoisted out, there's some concept of old-fashioned CDN versus new CDN. It's like everyone stopped innovating and it just had a box. Like, if you assume the CDN doesn't ever do anything, never innovates the business, then maybe. But the reality of the industry we're working is everyone is innovating all the time. So yes, to Terry, I understand where you're coming from, and yes, it's probably a realistic challenge. But the other side, is there also an opportunity for the CDNs to be better at distribution of workloads and becoming a distribution cloud rather than just a delivery network? So I think the CDNs have got a few tricks up our sleeves to play when it comes to the deployment and just distribution of workloads. We've been doing it for years and we haven't stood still.
Absolutely. Mukaddim, any thoughts on that?
So my take there is CDNs and Edge are going to complement each other. So it's not a replacement, it's not a one-to-one replacement. So if I'm actually treating CDNs not as a set of servers, rather it's an intelligent piece of software, it's an application, that would be running on the edge, right? And the hyperscalers, they have got bigger fish to fry. So if you look at AWS, right? And again, I'm quoting Dan Rayburn based on an article that he has written the other day. He was talking about AWS has turned on content delivery over Fastly. And I know that our colleagues in Fastly is there. So if that is true and if that is happening, so AWS is probably want to grow their cloud infrastructure and their edge presence, like AWS Outpost and AWS Wavelength, over doing the content delivery over CloudFront. So my take is that CDN and Edge probably will be complementary until and unless, to the point, as Steve said, CDNs become lazy, the CDN providers, and they don't innovate.
Yeah, I mean, we're delivering. The CDN today has been like, let's be the mailman and deliver the bits when requested, right? And I think they're massively complementary services you're talking about here. The applications that we're using to log into whatever the latest service of choice is today, right? You have to get through the application environment to get to the stream to press play, right? So it's massively complementary. The challenges associated with scale on-demand applications for on-demand challenges that are going to only increase the more and more content and interactivity we have, and the more devices there are for all manner of other industries who need to use the internet. So yes, massively complementary, and as I say, there will be more competition for sure. That's always good.
I think there's been many an operator CDN that's failed and capitulated and gone running back to the people who've been doing it for several decades, in my opinion. So we will see. So just one or two more quick questions here. So what parts of OTT video workflows lend themselves well to edge deployment? Steve, I'm going to throw that one at you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we looked at the edge functions service we're bringing out, what we needed to do was look at, well, what are we going to use this for? So the obvious things are, and one of the key use cases that's been around for a long time is image manipulation from a content distribution point. Does everyone want to manipulate their entire image library so you've got 15 different versions of the same image, or do you want to do it on the fly and just deliver the one you need? And that's been a web conversation for a number of years. So that, if you walk into an image manipulation use case, then you can start to think about, okay, so what we're doing is asking for something from a storage environment somewhere. We're taking a set of inputs and then manipulating it to give an output. That's your basic edge use case today, on a sort of request by request basis. So image manipulation, straightforward. Then think about personalized content. Then think about security authentication, data collection that goes along with QoE. Compliance, access controls, all of those kind of things. You can start seeing how the the application environment comes to play with the edge today. Different content for different needs, different bitrate ladders for different needs. The so-called manifest manipulation use cases. Those are pretty straightforward. And we had earlier multi-CDN discussions. There's groups like the Streaming Video Alliance with open caching. Thinking about intelligence in the routing or routing of traffic to the right endpoint. So those are the kind of things we think are going to be the use cases.
Mukaddim, any thoughts?
Look, Steve has covered all of the use cases that I could think of. Probably one that I would just extend on is Steve talked about that manifest manipulation use case. So for me, the future is predictive adaptive bitrate streaming. So what I mean by that is the adaptive bitrate streaming today, it is still tuning to the network condition. But then if we could predict that how the network condition is going to look like in the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes out, and then I understand my user context and the device context, how I can actually do the ABR in that way. So that's why it's a mouthful, predictive adaptive bitrate streaming, but and ultimately it comes down to how you actually create that manifest sort of beforehand, knowing that what the demand will look like and what the user context would be.
There we go, folks.
That's perfect case. Yeah.
There we go, folks. You heard it here first on CDS. It was PMABR, I think that was. Fantastic. Okay, one last bit of fun question. Although I think it's probably got some real answers. When not to think about edge? When are there times when it's simply virtualizing or distributing services out to the edge? It just isn't applicable. When is bare metal better? What are the not use cases that you can think of? And let's keep these answers short because we need to move to the last session shortly. So. Anything jumps to mind, guys?
I suppose the first thing to say is, as we've seen with things like bare metal, if you have a really particular need for something to do with GPUs and you need GPUs for a certain reason, I'm sure Thierry would have a point of view on this. But when you need GPU in edge compute, do you have access to CPU or GPU or FPGA, and what are you having access to? That becomes the question, and then that becomes the use case challenge, I think.
Yeah. So I'll just mention two things. So one is probably the broadcast functions. Many of them are still not ready to be run in a fully virtualized and edge manner. And the second one would be some of the network functions, because you won't get the same level of performance from the core network functions by running on an edge infrastructure yet, because you still need a bare metal, and you may actually run a cloud native function, a CNF on a bare metal, but you need the bare metal for the performance.
Guys, I'd like to thank you both enormously for helping us peer into the future. So Mukaddim, thank you very much.
Yeah, nice, thank you. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Not at all. And Steve, likewise, thank you again.
Thank you, Mukaddim. Thank you, Dom. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And hopefully the guys will stick around in the chat room if you've got any other trailing questions, and we can maybe chat with them after the end of the session coming up.